Okay, good morning. All right, now, too early or too soon? This will wrap up the last few sermons we started with this new year concerning Bible origins, lexicons, Septuagints, textual criticisms, textual variations. So this is going to wrap it up for now. And we're going to go into it. We have two things to cover this morning, and then we'll be done. So I wanted to address a controversy, just one, with the Septuagint, and why there are some debates about whether or not the Septuagint should or shouldn't be used. Okay, it's an enormous study that we're not going to get into this morning, but I'd like to show you a very common controversy found with the Septuagint people used to attempt to put the Septuagint away for good. So in previous sermons, we went through the genealogy of Genesis 5, and we added up how old everyone is when they had their kids. You remember that? And if you did this, if we did the math up to Noah, the math is 1,656 years using the King James Masoretic. So that's how long we had between Adam and the flood. And then sticking with that translation, according to Genesis 5:27 then, Methuselah died at the age of 969 years old. Okay? This makes the year that Methuselah died the exact year the flood takes place. You stick with the Masoretic text. So if Methuselah died the same year the flood happened, or the flood occurred, then we've got three suppositions we could make. So it was just coincidence that Methuselah died the same year of the flood, or he drowned in the flood, right? So lived 669 years and then drowned. And then, or God waited until Methuselah died and then allowed the flood. Okay, so those aren't outrageous, conclusions. And we've seen the cases that God actually does use men's lifetimes to kick off certain events. That would be the wilderness, for instance. Remember, the generation had to die first. David and Solomon's, another one. You'll see God delay judgment sometimes between generations. So waiting till Methuselah died isn't really that out of sorts. It's not so far out that it's not unbelievable. Now, if we use a copy of the Septuagint, this morning I've got the Brenton's edition. Okay, so several people asked me which editions I use. This morning we're going to look at this one real quick. This is Brenton's. If we use this Septuagint and do the math, the same math we did using the Masoretic, the same math from Genesis 5, we come up with Adam to the flood is 2,256 years. Okay, so here we are. So when we did the math, now remember we had the 600 extra. Remember that? And I believe I said 700 in one of the former sermons. It's 600 years. Okay, I must have moved something around, but nevertheless, here it is. So there is the years. I forgot my comma there, I see. But anyway, and this is Codex Vaticanus that we're using, okay? So this is now Methuselah's age stays the same. This is not a case where he's got 100 years added. So the King James and the Septuagint agree that Methuselah was 969 years old when he died. Now, as you can see, like I said, we've got an extra 600 years, and we've done videos or sermons on that. But using the Septuagint math with Methuselah and his age, we see that with the Septuagint, Methuselah is going to die 14 years after the flood happens, okay? So, and this is a big problem with this Septuagint that people will bring up, that Methuselah dies 14 years after the flood, okay? In the King James, he doesn't. So the discrepancy is like this, and you can follow the math. There are studies on this. So Noah lived 950 years, and the flood came during his 600th year, okay? All the texts agree. The Masoretic has Lamech, his father, being 182 years old at the time Noah was born. And Noah's age at the time of the flood was 600. Add that to 182, and you get 782, okay? So that's the number of years between Lamech's birth and the flood. And then 782 here is also the exact number of years that Methuselah lived after his birth, or after Lamech's birth. So if you do this, 782 years is the amount of time that Methuselah lived after Lamech's birth. Okay? So that's why this number is what we come up with in the Septuagint, or I'm sorry, the King James Version. Now, the Septuagint says that he lived 188 years. Lamech was 188 years old when he gave birth to Noah. Add that to the 600 years, and we've got 788. Okay, so there's the discrepancy. That means that the Septuagint Methuselah, if he's 802, 788, these are the different numbers between the King James and the Septuagint. Subtract those, you've got a 14-year discrepancy, which is added on to the end of Methuselah's life. Okay? This is all because, and it's a study, they've got a whole graph showing you how this works. If you do the math through Genesis 5, Methuselah lived 802 years after Lamech, causing him to die 14 years after the flood started. Okay, so that's the math they do. And I didn't do a very good job. I was trying to graph it out. But if you compare it to other texts, it starts to get a lot of other numbers in there. So anyway, very simply, the King James says Methuselah died the same year the flood occurred. Do the math. The Septuagint, the Vaticanus Codex, says that Methuselah died 14 years after the flood started. And this is something scholars, and it's easy math, they pointed out. So either Methuselah, for 14 years, either he was on board the ark, he was a stowaway, or he was killed by the flood. Now, the discrepancy being that this versus the King James and the Septuagint, okay? So when we use the Septuagint to prove something, people use the King James to prove something against the Septuagint. This being that they're saying, okay, well, since Methuselah lived 14 years after the flood, according to Septuagint, then the Septuagint is false, it's corrupt, it's a fake, it's been tampered with. Okay, and that really starts to have people doubt the witness of the Septuagint. And this is just one of a few, of a very few. But like I said earlier, in Brenton's Septuagint, if we read verse 25, which I know you probably can't see this, but this is actually from my Septuagint, the Brenton, so I put it on the copier. Verse 25, and Methuselah lived 167 years and begot Lamech. Okay, now that's the problem. It's not so much how old Methuselah was when he died. Both Bibles agree. It's how old he was when he gave birth to Lamech, Noah's father. Okay? When you move this age around, you're going to have an extra 14 years floating around. Because the Bibles, and this is why I didn't go all the way through, some Bibles say that the flood started 5 years or after Lamech died. Some say it started immediately. Some people say he lived the flood started 35 years after Lamech's death. That's where the numbers start getting confusing, okay? But anyway, Methuselah in 167 years, now this is the Brenton Septuagint, that number's the problem. That's the one that causes the difference. So if you notice at the beginning, so what's going on here, you'll see here the Greek letter beta next to this number in the Septuagint. It's a Greek letter beta. That's actually the lowercase beta. The uppercase beta looks like our capital B. Well, if you go to so that is pointing us to a footnote, okay? If we go to the footnote at the bottom of the page, we'll see our beta here, and it says Alex 187. Okay, so it says 167 with a beta, footnote, and then it says Alex 187. Okay, so if you go to, but what's that mean? This Alex 187. Well, if you go to the preface of this Bible, of the Septuagint, you'll notice I'm going to read this paragraph to you. Right here. I'm going to zoom in on this one for you. So what it says, it's talking about the history of the Septuagint. We know Ptolemy Philadelphus, we know all about him. And it's going to say, it has been preserved in a large number of manuscript copies of the original, and the Greek text in Brenton's edition is based on Vaticanus, an early 4th century manuscript, with some reliance on other texts particularly Alexandrinus, a 5th century manuscript. All right. And I know you guys can read. However, I do read things out loud because we do have people that get the sermon in audio only format. Okay, so that's why you'll see me reading things too. So this edition of Brenton's Septuagint then is based on Codex Vaticanus and a Greek. That Codex Vaticanus is a Greek manuscript found in the Vatican in Rome, and according to this, in 4th century manuscript, okay? And it also says that some reliance is found upon the Alexandrinus Codex, a 5th century manuscript. So it's important to understand this. The Brenton edition of the Septuagint actually draws from 2 ancient copies of the Greek, one being Codex Vaticanus and the other being Codex Alexandrinus. Okay, so it actually draws from 2. So if we go back to our Genesis 5 here, we'll see that the 167 years is the problem, and that eventually causes Methuselah to outlive the flood by 14 years. But our footnote here said that the Codex Alexandrinus lists 187. Now, that extra 20-year difference between these two is the difference. That's what causes Methuselah with Lamech's age. That's what causes it to be that gets rid of the 14-year deficit or addition. And with this, if you say it's 187, he actually dies 6 years before the flood. 6 years before the flood, okay? So that is because this is 14 years after 187 causes Methuselah to die 6 years before the flood, which of course makes more sense. It doesn't make more sense that he died before the flood or on the same year of the flood, but we know for sure he did not live after that flood. We know for sure. So this is to show you that at times people will put away the Septuagint using examples like this without having read the preface. Okay? And like I've said before, when it comes to Septuagint or any other manuscript or translation, there's no such thing as a perfect translation. There's not. So before you doubt the Septuagint, based on what others have said, check out both manuscripts. Okay? And I use this example to answer several people's questions about what edition I use when it comes to the Septuagint. So I say I use both the Brenton's, which some is based, mostly this is based on Codex Vaticanus, the Brenton's, okay? But then I have the Orthodox Septuagint copy, which is based on Codex Alexandrinus. This is just Alexandrinus. And I'll show you that if I read Genesis 5:27 out of Codex Alexandrinus, it'll say, so all the days of Methuselah which he lived were 969 years old, and he died. So I showed you that that does stay the same, okay? And if you look at our other 525, we've got 525 here, which shows us, and Methuselah lived 187 years and begot Lamech. You see the difference. So here, Brenton's pulled from Vaticanus, and here this one sticks with just Alexandrinus. But Brenton's does have a footnote pointing us to Alexandrinus, showing you that there is a discrepancy between even the two codexes in Greek. So you can't put the entire Septuagint away just because one codex doesn't agree with the other. You see what I'm saying? They draw from separate codexes. So this is not the same book as this one. They're not identical. That's why I have both. Even though this one will tell you sometimes that the Alexandrinus text says such and so, it's not consistent enough. If you just go to one that used solely the Alexandrinus, you'll find it. And like I said, this one I do like because it tends to read more like a book. It's got better chapter verses and more organization. The font's a bit better, and it doesn't have a parallel Greek and English. So of course it's much faster to look things up, and it's much easier to read. It reads, and the English reads better. So anyway, when it comes to the Septuagint, there's generally two sides to the debate. Some say it's authentic. Some say it's a fake or forgery. All right? Now, people wish that the wish to put it away, they'll usually go with examples like Methuselah, so that they can call the Septuagint false. But it's only an error, like we said, with one copy of one codex and not others. So is that enough to put the Septuagint away completely? Can one codex be used in place of another as a witness? That's what I'm asking. And this is the subject of much, much debate. Personally, I try to check out as many sources as I can before commenting one way or the other. Okay, so there are discrepancies. That's a reality. But if there's discrepancies between two codexes used in the Septuagint, that's no different than having a discrepancy between King James Masoretic text and something else anyway. And nobody really fights to put the Pentateuch away. I don't know why. And of course, the Dead Sea Scrolls are big game changers. You'd be like, well, read what is about the Septuagint and our magic witness, the Dead Sea Scrolls. I did not look into that. I'm sorry, I did not. I did not have the time to go back and find out which Qumran Dead Sea Scroll has which such and so. I haven't seen anything else on this, so I don't know if we have a Dead Sea Scroll that proves it one way or the other. And you see, since we have differing codexes, the Qumran scroll could prove one over the other. So as far as a bad translation of the Septuagint, if we were able to verify one codex over the other, then we would have the more authentic copy over one or the other. That's where we are at right now with the Septuagint. That's the debate. That's why I haven't put it away all the way, because I do see discrepancy. So I can't pick sides on the codex. Really, I can't. And it's an enormous area of study, and I don't have all the answers. But as I continue to study what I find out, I'll pass that on to you. And I encourage you guys to keep studying out the Septuagint yourself, and keep in mind that we need more than one witness. And I also wrote about similar things in this month's newsletter concerning the Keys to the Kingdom Bible. And like I said, I'm currently studying that translation, and so far, so good. So far, so good. But when it comes to textual criticism and variants, you must realize the differences in text do exist, and they are a matter of reality. So study the matter out and find out the how and why. That's what I do. Usually the differences are minor. Okay, we've got English translations, punctuation, words have been moved around, we've got letters. But if something actually changes doctrine, Bible doctrine, that's when you need to start taking a closer look at things. Okay, and some Bible doctrine, it goes both ways. Christians believe in a burning hell as Bible doctrine, but it's not. So when you hear something that suggests the burning hell is not Christian and it's not found in the Bible, investigate it. That would be a case of it changing doctrine, what you think the Bible teaches. Okay, so it goes both ways. Now that'll do it for this sermon series on various texts and translations concerning our English Bible that we kicked off at the beginning of January, if you recall. I'm not closing the door on the entire subject. I will be sure to continue to study this out, because things have been presented to me over the last month that I didn't know about, such as the Keys to the Kingdom Bible, and it's a fascinating study in and of itself. And there's still outstanding issues, I know, but as of today, I'm not prepared to address all of them. So we'll get to that. And I'll let you guys, as you go along next month, read our newsletter to find out more about what's going on with the Keys to the Kingdom study. All right, to wrap things up this morning, I want to show you how English works in older Bibles. Okay, very quickly. Not only is this very interesting and helpful, but it is a request from a few homeschooling families. And don't forget, just because they're not part of our physical congregation here, doesn't mean they're not part of our congregation. And so they said, hey, Pastor Reed, we've been encouraged by you to go back and look at the older copies. And when they found that they went back to the older copies, they had great difficulty in discerning anything. And we're going to show you that. And this goes right along with our Sunday morning Bible studies, actually, about idioms, expressions, figures of speech found in the Bible. Okay, and if you wanted more info on that, I would suggest picking up or reading Figures of Speech Used in the Bible by Bullinger. Okay, he also wrote the Companion Bible. Okay, and that really helps. He did that. The Companion Bible, and we also have Lamsa's works. Lamsa did more than a few books on idioms in the Bible explained. Okay, we actually are going through some of these for our Sunday morning study, so this will go right along with what it is we're doing. Now, if you've been exploring the history of the Bible, you may have looked, like I said, at early versions yourself and noticed that they are not easy to read, even though they're in English. And we'll look at a few and see if we can decode them. So here's an example from the first English Bible. This is Wycliffe's 1382. Tell me what you can read. No? It looks like a cipher or cryptic, doesn't it? Now, I see, well, I know, you guys, that's the letter I. Okay, so we're moving on. All right. And I assure you, this is English. This is English. Very early English. Plus, you'll notice the font is Gothic. And we have spelling errors and inconsistencies, if you can tell, okay? Let's move forward a little bit. Here's the Tyndale Bible, first printed in 1526, about 145 years after the one we just looked. And it's maybe a little more readable, but still challenging. And what's that word? Propheti? It looks like prophet, but we've got the first letter after the P. Looks like an R. And if you look at chapter, that's what an R is. So, and what is this little symbol at the end of that word doing? So, we'll go a little further into the future to this will be the Geneva 1560, all right? And now this is printed outside of England. That's why the font that's chosen is Roman. It's a Roman font, and it's much like the font we use today, Times New Roman on your word processors. Okay, so that's a Roman font because of being outside of England, all right? It's a little easier, but then we have words like this, and we have words like TARF with a 9 in it. And now this 9 here, TARF, okay, that 9 is called a truncation. That indicates the omission of a letter. And in this case, it's the omission of a final S or IS. So if you look at this, the 9 is a truncation, and it means something, an S or IS has been left off. So that's Tarsus. That's Tarsus, okay? Right, and from the context of the verse, we know where we're at. But yeah, Tarsus, that's how you read that. We'll get there. And what we'll do is we'll keep moving forward in the future and then work our way back. And before you know it, you'll be reading English, Old English like a pro, okay? It's not difficult. Now, if you notice our next one, we know this one. This is the 1611, okay, King James. Now this was used, this was printed with the printing press. Remember Gutenberg? And the typeface letter, or the typeface is black letter. Okay, and you'll notice the English Bibles pick this up, this black letter. Notice our Geneva wasn't, but the other English stayed with this kind of Gothic black letter. And after a while, by 1611, it had become pretty much tradition to have the Bible printed this way. So the English Bible stayed with that style of font. Now the first clue to decoding this is what is seen as a long S. We'll look at a long S, okay? And like here in verse 5, let me see, a long S. Neither shall, right there. Right, so that's a long S. Okay, we see shall, but that's not an F. F has a crossbar. So long S was used in English up until the late 1700s. Okay, so you see that is actually an S, but there's no crossbar because we see the 4 here. So long S was used even in our Bill of Rights. Okay, so there's the long S. Congress. And you can see this is calligraphy, not letter type. So it's got a little flourish here, but that's actually what a long S looks like. And you'll see that a lot in the 1611. So now that's the reason why in the typeset it looks like it's been chopped in half. This is calligraphy handwriting. Okay, but you can see all the way up to the Bill of Rights, which is 1789, the long S is still used. So, there. So you see, when it came to the typeset, the long S was chopped in half. Okay, so that's the long S, and it was actually in the English language for a long time. Now, like we said, that's not the letter F. The letter F has a crossbar all the way through. So if we look at the word confess, you see? So there's our F, C-O-N-F-E-S-S. This is a long S, confess. The long S is only used at the beginning of a word, unless it's a capital, and in the middle of words. The long S is never used at the end, see? But when we get to another word, confessor, now it changes around. Since the short S is now in the body of the word, the character is changed to a long S, right? And note the R at the end is a weird symbol now. That's because the R here is preceded by a letter that has a rounded right corner. Anytime like B, D, O, H, etc., when the R is preceded by a letter that has a rounded corner here, it's changed to a stylized R, known as an R rotunda. So that's an R rotunda. All right? Now, look at the long S here. Right? Okay, in the phrase, the Last Supper, notice the S here is in the body of the word again, so it's a long S, but it's not, but in supper, we have a long S, but because the long S occurs at the beginning of a word, it's capitalized. So that's the Last Supper, and you see, S is not a long S because it's at the beginning, it has a capital, and we recognize that as a normal S. Now the long S here and T are connected. You notice? That's known as a ligature. As a ligature. So when they're connected together, they're called a ligature, and that forms a single letter so that the typesetter would only have to use one letter here to save time. It's more efficient. So you'll see ligatures a lot. That doesn't make it a different word or anything. That's just a efficiency for the typesetter, that's all. So the Last Supper. And see, now you're getting it. You're going to be able to read this, I promise. And a lot of people have 1611s, but they won't use them because it's all Greek to them, right? So there it is, the Last Supper. So you're learning already. Now, that's to save time by not having two separate letters. It's just a ligature. That's all it is. Now, the long S is confusing, I know. It's very confusing. As a matter of fact, it even confused the people doing the Bible. And I'll show you. So here in Leviticus 1:6, and look, we have, and he shall, long S, flay, you see the crossbar? Flay the burnt offering and cut it into his pieces, okay? So this is how it looks in the first edition, 1611. But when you go to the second edition of the King James 1611, you see, he shall slay. There's no crossbar here. He shall slay the burnt offering and cut it into his pieces. So we have a difference here where the wrong word is used. Slay, not flay. But we know he can't be slaying the burnt offering because if we look up here in 5, he shall kill the bullock. So he's already dead. He needs to flay it, not slay it. This is not a translation error at all. It's just a typeset error. That doesn't change anything doctrinally. Relax. This is just it confused people with those long S's. Okay, it actually reads slay. And if you check in your King James, your modern King James, you'll see it. And you also notice here that the word he has got two E's in it. Okay? And yet the one in verse 5 only has one. Right? You see that? That's because terminal E's. It's a terminal E. They were just thrown in. Just peppered in wherever. They're just thrown in there. It's terminal E. That's because spelling was not consistent until the 1762 edition of the King James, because 1755 would be when the first English dictionary would be produced, and that would be not Webster, that's 1828. This would be Johnson's English Dictionary of 1755. That's what started to standardize spelling. All right, so it's not as much as a mistranslation as it is just creative spelling. Once again, with this he having the terminal E and this he not having the terminal E. So that's interesting. All right, now let's try to read Matthew 26:26, okay, from the 16:11. But before we do, what is this at the start of the verse? All right, what is that? It looks like a big C, or maybe like since. That is known as a pill crow. A pill crow. And it's in the shape of the C because it stands for the Latin word capitulum. Capitulum, which is Latin for little head. Capitulum. Now, this would start a paragraph. Okay? A pill crow, to show us that a new paragraph is starting. C for capitula, little head, and then that divides texts. This also would divide text so that chapters could be used. This is how they divided the text into chapters, or capitula. So the original symbol of the pill crow was just a C. But over time, it got stylized into this. And we recognize that. If you ever use Microsoft Word and go show characters, you'll see at the beginning of your paragraphs that are indented, you'll see the pill crow showing you start of a new paragraph. This was still used back then, but it was still printed there. Okay? But even though it began as a C, it eventually got stylized this way. And eventually, the pill crow fell out of use, but the space remained, an indentation. That's why we indent our paragraphs, because there used to be a printed pill crow there that disappeared, and now all we have is a space. So there you go. Remember when your teachers told you to indent new paragraphs? You could have put a pill crow there and made an A. All right. So this disappeared, and the indentation remained, negating the need of the pill crow to be seen. And usually people are only familiar with it if you actually have your word processor show you characters, right? All right, so back to our Matthew 26:26. Notice the double hyphen here in Jesus, okay? You're going to see that a lot. The double hyphen in the Old English works just like our single hyphen. It divides a word on the line, so that's still Jesus, okay? The double hyphen doesn't do anything more that's special, and it functions as a modern hyphen. Now, we're going to say, and as they were eating, Jesus, there's our long S, Jesus took bread, notice our R rotunda, and blessed it. We'll get to those double lines in just a minute. And blessed it, notice there's our long S's again, occurring in the body of the letter of the word, two are used. Blessed it, and then we've got this symbol. Now, what is that? That symbol at the beginning of the word break is known as a Tyronian et. Tyronian et. Now, Tyro was employed by the famous Roman orator Cicero, and he took notes for Cicero's speeches, all right? And he devised a symbols, and he devised a way of shorthand of sorts in Latin. He also used Greek symbols. So Tyro's shorthand caught on with the scribes and was used for more than 1,000 years after Tyro died. So he created a little trend using shorthand in order to copy speeches. Write speeches down as they were being spoken. Among the shorthand was this symbol here, meaning et, which is and. It means and in Latin. So back to our example, And as they were eating, Jesus took bread and blessed it and brake it. Pteronium et, break it. And, Latin for and. All right. And you may also notice here that we have U's and V's that are just used interchangeably. Sometimes U's are unto. There's a U in Jesus. Then you have a V here used for in unto. You see that? Here's a U in cup. Right? But sometimes V's are U's, sometimes U's are V's, sometimes vice versa. There is no real answer as to why it seems that U's and V's are interchangeable. There's no real answer for that. They're just used. And like we said, the spelling and grammar rules in English really hadn't been standardized yet. So using a U in place of a V or a V in place of a U was just common, and it is common throughout the whole Bible. So you'll see it. Most of the time we've read the verses enough, we understand that that's unto, not V-N-T-O, right? And also in the verse, you see the double horizontal line between and blessed. You see those double horizontals. They're actually related to this asterisk over here. Okay, and all those do in the King James, the old 1611, is they're related to the marginal notes. Okay, so that's how, and you've had margin renderings in other Bibles before, right? A center column reference, footnotes like we saw in the Septuagint. So these just point the reader over here, and that's just how margin notes and cross-reference in scriptures were done. All right? So the asterisk, as you can see, goes over here, and it shows us 1 Corinthians, right? And then the double lines signify alternative English renderings. So that's just how they used margin reference notes in the 1611. And you also come across a third symbol. If you do see one, you'll come across a third. It looks like a little sword. It's called an obelisk. And that signifies literal translations. All right, just a way to mark notes early on. That's all those are. Just a way to mark notes back then. And you also see a few words in the old Bibles that are, instead of being blackface type, you'll actually come across words that are in the Roman type. Now that's to show that those words in the Roman typeface were not actually found in the original manuscript, but were added to make the English read better. And you've all seen this in your modern King James. The modern King James, instead of doing Roman types, it's in Roman, it's italics. Exactly, it's italics. They actually put it, they subdued the font and put it less bold so as not to draw attention to the words that were added to make the English read better. But the italics actually do the opposite of that in our Bibles. It actually draws your eye to the words that were not actually found in the original. If you ask me, I think the italics do the opposite job. But anyway, those were just added by the translators to have the English read better. But those, when you see the additions like that, they're often inconsistent and incomplete. So don't take those as mistranslations or anything either. And you'll notice in Matthew 26 again, that there's a capital I in this verse. Is it I? Right? But then you'll also notice that same character is the capital J in Jesus. You notice that? Right? I is I, and then it's a J all of a sudden in Jesus. And that's because at the time, the letter I actually did the job of a vowel and a consonant. Okay? Eventually, they would be distinguished. The letter I the consonant work of the letter I would become the letter J. So at the time of this printing, there was no English letter J. No English letter J. That's an I. And we can tell it is by that right there. So, although there seems to be J's, you're like, wait, Reed, I've seen J's before. There's a letter J. That J is actually a terminal I. And you can tell that it's a terminal I because of the little tail. And you know it's an I because we've got 10, 20, 30, 1, 2, 3, 10, 20, 30, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you see, when it's in capitals, it's not a terminal I stylized as a J. Lowercase terminal I looks like a J. It's a lot to keep up with, I know. But just so you know, there were no J's in the English language back then. So let's go back to the Geneva. Now we can actually use what we've studied to kind of read this. Thee I declared unto thee that were. Thee I declared unto thee that were. And you see, now that doesn't work. So what's going on here with the word thee? And what's this little squiggle right here above the E's? That mark above the E there is an abbreviation mark which indicates you should add either the letter N, as in November, or M, as in Mike, right? So when we add those, now we can read, then I declared unto, remember our V's and U's were interchangeable back then, then I declared unto them that were led. Now that's better, isn't it? That's what that says. And you'll also notice here, you've got a Y up here, and you've got a Y here, but for whatever reason we have a superscript T, and then down here we've got a Y with a superscript E. Okay? Those are not actually the letter Y at all. That's not the letter Y. And this is Geneva. They were doing things differently with the type fonts than England was. Okay? This is the letter thorn. You didn't remember that one when you said your ABCs? The English letter thorn. In Geneva, the Y is used to signify the English letter thorn. They didn't have it in their typeface in Roman because it's not a common Roman letter. In fact, it's not a Roman letter. Thorn, okay? Now this actually was used to indicate the TH sound, as in this, they, right? And notice that when it was italicized, it does look like a Y. This branches off italicized. So the closest letter they could find to the English letter thorn in Geneva was a Y. Okay? So with this in mind, the top letter Y is thorn, T, that, to them that were led, all the things that thorn, E, the Lord had showed me. Thorn, TH, with a superscript, that, the. Easy enough, right? All right. Now you can read this. Ye old blacksmith shop. Well, that's not a Y. That's thorn. The old blacksmith shop. Now you know, and remember the terminal E's were just thrown in there. That's not ye. That's the English letter thorn. The. So that means that's not you, that's thou. Drop the Y, or drop the thorn, which we don't use anymore. We have our word you now. You. You see how that works. The English letter thorn is gone. Thou. But because a Y was used in Geneva, in English today, we have the word you instead of thou. That's all. That's all. All right. So, now you know. Yeah, you guys will learn something today. When you go to, you can bring your King James 11, your 1611 everywhere and just start evangelizing with it. And be like, did you know that there was no English dictionary in the 1755? You know, and all that. Now, another symbol in the Geneva that you're going to find often is our old friend, the ampersand. All right? That's some trivia. Most people don't even know what that's called. You know, what is that, like shift 5? Is that shift 5? Another symbol, okay, now we all know that means and, okay? And it's a symbol, another symbol for our Latin word and, which was et. Remember Tyro? So this is instead and was used for the word et, which is and in Latin, so we know. Now it began as a ligature, and if you see this in the italicized form, it as a ligature, which remember that was two letters that were connected to save a step, it actually was an E, it was a stylized E and a T. And when you turn it, it actually starts to look like E and T. It was just a ligature that eventually became this letter, all right? Now, but it started off as et. So it was E-T, and eventually it became, that E-T became the letter ampersand. You're like, Reed, ampersand's not a letter. Well, according to the primers and old schools, and this is back from 1857, you see here that the ampersand is actually the 27th letter of the alphabet. Ampersand was really a letter. So we had 27. So, but where did the word ampersand come from if it means et? Back then, when you said your alphabet, letters that made words on their own, so give me an example. Which letter makes a word on its own? I, A, right. So when you said your alphabet, if you were to say it now, you would say the word per se before a letter that makes a word. Per se A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, per se I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z, and per se and. Eventually, because and makes its own word. W, X, Y, Z, and per se, and. Ampersand. Ampersand. There's where we get the word ampersand. So and, eventually it was dropped from my alphabet. But you can see per se and per se and is ampersand, and that was actually added to the dictionary by 1837. So you still won't find this one in the 1828. And per se and ampersand. Now let's put this all together and read from that Wycliffe Bible of 1382. Okay? So let's go back. Now we can read this. All right, now look. Put this all together. Now, one thing I didn't cover, this is an old W right there. This squiggle here signifies we've dropped the letter A. Right? Okay, I didn't cover that one. So, in the beginning was the Word. Notice our R rotunda. R rotunda. Now, in the beginning was the Word, et, and the Word was at God. This slash here is actually a comma back then. At God, et, and God was the Word, comma. This was in the beginning at God, comma. Right? Now let me explain one more thing. Look at this semicolon is going to show us a new verse eventually. So disregard that one. But in the beginning at God, comma, all things were made by him. Things, remember our thorn, right? Now you still, I know, that one is very difficult. Still doesn't look like I read what I was supposed to be reading, does it? So, the old W and our thorns, so in thee, because there's our thorn. You're like, you're missing the TH. No, there's thorn. Notice how it looks like a Y in the English blackface. In the beginning, there's our spelling errors, no dictionaries yet, was, squiggle separ, and this is just a Wycliffe function. This signifies a dropped A. Was the, thorn, Word, W, O, R, rotunda, D, and the Word was at God. Now you see it. And God was the thorn, Word, or rotunda. This thorn was in the beginning at God. All things were made by him. Remember the squiggle? You dropped an N or an M. H-I-M, him. And W-I, thorn. And with. You see? And with. That's it. You can read Old English like a pro now. Now you can decode it. Now this doesn't help. This makes it very difficult, but who is going back to 1382 Wycliffe Bibles and preaching nowadays anyway? I couldn't even do that. But if you go to your 1611s and further, remember these rules, they'll help you out. Because now you're like, oh, well, right. You know what we're talking about now when you see the thorns and the R rotunda. So now it doesn't look like it's in a completely different language, at least. But the spelling errors are really what gets you. They really do, because they're just throwing, this is the word beginning. That's beginning. And they showed you they dropped an N there, but that doesn't help. And that still looks like a thorn, right? It doesn't help very much, not at all. Not when you go this old, but 1611 is a piece of cake. Now, like I said, I don't think this little lesson of mine is going to help anybody read an Old English Bible as quickly as they do a New English novel. But it should help you as you go along when you find yourself looking at older copies. When you find yourself looking at older copies. So are the older copies too early to read? Not now. You know your early English. And apparently Methuselah didn't die too soon. Or the flood came too soon. Whichever codex you go to, right? So that's all we have for this morning. Now remember, we do have the newsletter coming out for March and April. That'll be sent out this next week. And we have the Keys to the Kingdom study. The Bible I'm still studying. So I will continue to study those. I encourage you guys, if you look at the newsletter this week or this month, I'll tell you what exactly is going on with that Keys to the Kingdom right now. It's still a work in progress, but everybody they've been asking about that in my studies about it. So we'll wrap up today with that.